Hello everyone, for today's 2-hour episode, we're going to be covering every commander and background pairing from Baldur's Gate. Yeah bro? Oh, that's a lot of commanders, bro. What the hell, are you kidding me? Stop wasting people's time. This is my show, what are you? Hey everyone, Queen's back. I know y'all miss me even though it's only been 2 weeks. Don't worry, I didn't forget you, I was actually just doing something in my life. Alright, today we're going to be doing the only cEDH tier list that matters, and when you're done watching this, today it should give you a better sense of what's actually out there in major tournaments, and probably what you should be playing. Before I pull up the tier list, I just wanted to say that this tier list is built through some data and compilation of every single top 16 finish in 2022, and until my Eminences can get more data going through Command Tower in the future, we're just gonna have to rely on event placement frequency to inform some decisions. Also, this tier list isn't here to validate your self-worth as an individual, so if you don't see your pet deck here, don't take it as a personal affront to you as a person. Like, you're more than a commander deck, and if you really want a place of validation, you can submit your decks to the DDB. Sorry, Sinestra. Okay, our tier structure is just 3 layers with best, good, and average, and anything underneath is just not worth talking about from a competitive standpoint. Okay, we've wasted enough time, let's just start with the first tier. Tier 1 is the best decks of the format. They excel at both the early pool section of a cEDH tournament and also play well into the semifinals and finals. So let's start with the king first, and that's Blue Farm. I know you're upsetty spaghetti that Blue Farm is being shilled as the best deck of the format, but Blue Farm has 24 top 16 finishes and consistently puts results throughout the year. Some of you would say that it's because of how popular the deck is, and sure, the deck might have more popularity than other decks on the list, but popularity alone does not create consistency in performance. Other decks on this tier list perform well but drop off throughout the year or take momentum, but Blue Farm is consistent and arguably better as the year goes on. It turns out having the top tier Grixis core with white tools to assist makes an incredible tournament deck. As Brian Koval says, Blue Farm isn't the fastest or grindiest deck, but it punches above average in both categories, and you can pivot or threaten various plans based on what the table's doing. It's many things and it's nothing at the same time as needed. Blue Farm is actually the best performing deck of 2022, and I don't see it slowing down in the future. And if you want to prepare for tournaments, then you just have to admit that the deck performs well and you have to learn how to play against it. The next deck is Tymna Thrasios. TNT on paper is the second best performing deck of the year, with 15 top 16 finishes and 2 top 4s. You probably wonder how I can still rate this deck as overrated even after such a good record, aside from being on the Turbo Nos pill. Lacking red is just so massive at this point, not having access to Dockside Deflecting Swat, the Red Blast, and also Underworld Breach lines while sporting a very underwhelming commander and another one that isn't enabled well without mediocre beaters is just hard to justify. But having access to Rhetorical Winds with silence support from white can only be so bad, especially when you combine it with additional lines from green like Hermit Druid, Protean Hulk, or Devoted Druid lines. For the coming events, I think TNT will have a lower representation in top 16 placements, and I wouldn't be surprised to bump this list down a tier in the future. And here's why. Most of TNT's finishes come from the earlier half of 2022, and if we only look at the second half, it's a mid-lane 5 top 16 finishes, while Roxai puts up 7. TNT is a deck that excels in a controlling meta. After all, it was the top deck of the Flash winner, where everyone was there to play the long grindy game. But unlike TNT mirrors, I don't know how TNT will do into a Grixis-led meta. If you actually want to be playing a Thrasios-led deck, I think this is the deck you want to play. Bruised Thrasios circumvents not having access to black with enough creature tutors that enables infinite mana lines that lets your Thrasios be a combo payoff. This also covers the pairing of a Kyrie Thrasios with Zerda in the Companion Zone. This Turbo Seaboard Muse deck has fast and easily findable lines like Swift Reconfiguration with Devoted Druid. Sans Black's access to white gives you the powerful protection of Sans effects, while you also get to enjoy all the great cards from red that TNT is missing. Bruised Thrasios can be the perfect middle ground with having a Thrasios deck that can reliably go fast in the meta as well. We have a lot of comedian MTG deck representation here, and the next tier 1 deck is Winota. Winota is the only stacks deck that consistently makes it to the end of a tournament with one event finish at Pun City where Mike Sad gets a big win for playing in power. Winota is great because it demonstrates the quality of synergy you need to be a performance cEDH deck. Like, if you're building a deck on synergy, then you have to ask yourself, is it as fast or efficient as Winota? I would keep a close eye on Winota though, as more players become hyper familiar with its play patterns, and its face-up nature might cause it to perform worse in events. Najeela is the next tier 1 deck with 5 top 16 finishes and 2 top 4 finishes in 2022. Najeela is just the best 5 color deck hands down, as she not only threatens a win on her own, but playing Najeela as a Storm deck with a few dedicated slots for Najeela combo is actually just the most efficient layering of the 99 to maximize win cons without threatening card quality. I think Najeela is one of those decks that isn't quite as exciting to Brewers and Pilots and is underrepresented for how strong the deck really is. The next and last list is going to ruffle some feathers, and it's Roxai. Roxai is a deck that really picks up steam in the second half of the year with at least one Roxai list in every single top 16, from the 5th Chaos Tournament to Mox Masters in December. Thanks to Brian Cook's work on the deck, the formerly underperforming Grixis list demonstrates how to solve for the 2 main constraints of the format, time and mana. The zero-cost Rog Rack enables mana payoffs that reduces the time needed to reach your payoff, and also plays a higher density of payoffs and tutors to utilize its advantage of mana, along with providing diverse paths to win through complicated board states that also consider stacks. I consider this iteration of Roxai to be the apex efficiency in the format, and every deck on this tier list should be compared in some way to Roxai where you are mindful of the trade-offs. This doesn't mean that every deck has to mimic what Roxai does, but knowing how focused Roxai is on winning, you just have to ask yourself, what am I getting from my deck that is better than what Roxai is doing? For Winota, it's having incredibly consistent and quick stacks plans that generates a board out of nothing. For Blue Farm, it's having access to White's tools to play flexibly in a meta while also having a Crom that can pressure an opponent. This is the baseline I use to compare what a tier 1 deck is, which should indicate why the following decks are in tier 2. So if you want 4 colors, then the next tier 2 deck might interest you, which is Thrasfile or Ichor Crom. You have the strong Grixis core along with Thrasios if that's something you want to do. This deck only has 2 top 16 finishes over the year and is probably a case of not being popular enough to have more appearances in the tournaments. It's worth noting that this might demonstrate the massive trade-off of having green instead of white. The last Thrasios of this tier list is Rograt Thrasios or Rog Thras. This incredibly fast Polytyrant deck is putting up good numbers despite how unpopular it is. It's fast as interaction, but it's hard to justify why you want to play a fast interactive Rograt deck when Rogside exists with more payoffs from being Grixis and also having access to creatures like Dockside. Still, Rog Thras puts up good results with 4 top finishes in 2022, so it's definitely still a good deck. Another underrated deck, and this one should be in tier 1 but isn't because of underrepresentation, is Armix Crom. Armix Crom is a solid Grixis deck that gets the benefit of having a consistent kill spell every single turn by turning your Armix sideways and discarding a card. Being able to deny synergistic commander pieces, their key piece on command, is very powerful, along with denying other blue base decks of their free spells by killing their commanders. It's very worthwhile to keep in mind in an interactive meta. The next deck we're all familiar with for winning tier 1 con. Sucker Krark is a great deck that can be fast when it wants to be, with difficult to navigate lines, while still having access to blue to interact when it needs to. The discussion here is not why it's good, but why it isn't the best, which can be seen by the drop-off in top 16 results, especially in the last quarter of 2022 with 0 representation. Sucker Krark is a tournament mainstay, but as more players have become aware of what the pair can do, it might be a similar case where other synergistic decks like Winota, where the commander will draw too much attention to the table. Unlike Winota, however, Winota has the ability to shut down the table's means to interact or impede its momentum, while Sucker Krark relies purely on interaction and either having enough mana to recast their interaction or having a free spell. Kinnan is another 2-color deck like Sucker Krark that I rate very highly. Like Sucker Krark and Winota, Kinnan is a commander-centric deck, except its payoff is doubling mana production. Kinnan can be incredibly fast, and depending on how it flips with a Big Flips variant, it can lock out a table with a Void Winnower before they can even get their footing. Kinnan has always been a good deck since Ikoria, and I think it's heavily underrated for how strong and efficient it is. From the overrated cEDH decks video comes Kenrith. Despite how I feel about the deck, Kenrith can only be so bad with access to all 5 colors. He does have unique Dockside lines with Phantasmal Image or Skirk Prospector, and being an infinite mana outlet in the command zone is still very powerful. But let's talk about some newcomers. A newcomer that has similar amounts of top 4 finishes as Sucker Krark is Rocco. Rocco's ability to have a creature tutor in the command zone gives this unique creature combo deck some degree of inevitability, but it's also very powerful for being able to find the right tool to support one of his many lines like Food Chain, Vivian Pod lines, or Kiki combos. Rocco can either find a piece to finish the line or protection like Random Ball should just stop all interaction and get its win. Another popular newcomer in the second half of 2022 is Tivit. Tivit plays really well in the stacks pods, and while Tivit himself costs a lot of mana to cast, he's very difficult to remove with Ward and immediately brings back value on ETB and also attack. With a flying 6/6 that rewards you on attack, Tivit is able to pressure your opponents very well to take action, while you accrue more value and find your own window. Tivit himself comboing of Time Sieve is also another point for the commander, and being Esper means you always have access to Thoracle lines, which means the deck has a good baseline. So that settles tier 2, which takes us to our last tier, which is what I consider to be average decks. These decks are still strong, but they have some key weaknesses to perform well in tournaments. The only one I'll cover is Temur Pirates because this deck does perform very well in events, but almost completely dies off late in the year. Just not having access to black with an easy to disrupt combo and with difficulty catching up makes this deck very average. It's much easier to understand this when you take a look at all the decks 1 tier up and see how each of them excel at something better than Temur Pirates. Sucker Krark and Kinnan are harder to stop. Tivit can play the late game extremely well, and 4-color decks obviously have more tools and efficient win cons. You can still have success with Temur Pirates, but it's going to be an uphill battle, and that's going to be the same for all the other decks within this tier. The rest of the decks here that had some successes in 2022 are Malcolm Vile, Kess, Minsk Hulk, Yisan, Malcolm Tina, Niv, Timnatana, Kirk, Urza, and Korvold. They all have at least 2 top 16 placements in events, so it's good to be aware of them because they'll definitely win games, but I will pay more attention to the decks above. So that's the tier list. I know you all have decks you think aren't represented here, but it doesn't matter because they didn't place well. That's just the honest, brutal answer. There are also pet decks that do well once an event but never show up again, and that's the thing about pet decks. They're not worse than all the decks here in any regard at all, like Magda went 7-0 in Marchesa and the old 5-mana Teferi won the CCU tournament, but they stopped showing up afterwards, and that's the key part. If we're going to be so punishingly harsh on Temur Pirates for not pulling its weight, then from a meta standpoint, we don't really have to rate how these decks stand against things you will see more reliably. There are new brews that stick, like Rocco and Tivit, and there are new brews that don't. As I said, the point of this tier list is to prepare people for a field and pick decks that are putting up results. If you really want your deck to show up on a tier list, then go out there and put results in big tournaments. 2023 has plenty of events like Silicon Dynasty to put results. Some decks are just overrated, and if you want to see what my overrated decks are, then you don't want to miss this not clickbait video. See you Sims later, and be out. Okay, back to what we're doing. First, we're going to review Vol with Noble Heritage. Oh, bro, that's a lot of commanders, bro. Yeah, that's a good pairing, bro. Let's talk about what the background noble heritage does. Yeah, that's Azorius, bro. Oh, I hate that card, bro.